everyone to this Voices of Emergence circle on regenerative capital. Voices of Emergence began just a couple of months ago as a podcast and has grown into a living field of practice, a community where inner transformation, collective intelligence and systemic regeneration meet. We explore what's emerging in culture, consciousness, technology, finance, and above all in our own hearts. And we do it not just through ideas, but through presence, embodiment, and relational practice. We hold circles and gatherings like this one, where people can slow down, meet themselves honestly, and sense what wants to come alive in the spaces between us. These spaces help us build real capacity, the capacity to navigate complexity with clarity, courage, and responsibility. What guides us is simple: curiosity, coherence, and a commitment to life. We're learning how to meet this moment together, not with old answers, but with the kind of leadership and imagination that can help regenerate the systems we're part of and reconnect us to the earth. Tonight is part of that journey. I welcome you all to an evening of depth, dialogue, and possibility, where finance meets humanity and the living earth, and imagination becomes infrastructure for regeneration. In this Voices of Emergence circle, we gather leading voices from the world's impact of investment, systems change and regenerative economics to explore how capital can become a catalyst for renewal rather than depletion. Together we'll inquire into how money, value and investment might evolve when guided by the principles of care, reciprocity and ecological intelligence. Our guests tonight are Ida Faldbakken, who joins us from Oslo. She's the founder of the Lineage Office. Alessa Berg, who's in London, who just came back from Web Summit, and founder and CEO of Top Tier Impact. Fredrik Blomquist, who's in Stockholm, in Helsinki actually tonight, and he's the founder of Fund Forward and Institute for Transition. And last but not least, Dana Ulrike Glatz. She's at COP30 in Belém, Brazil, and she's the founder of Global Impact Alliance. They are pioneering new pathways for finance, from circular and regenerative models to community ownership, feminine economics, and ecosystem leadership. But before our guests introduce themselves and their work, I want to give the word to my co-host Alex de Carvalho, who will introduce the flow of the evening. So remember, tonight is an exercise in active listening. So I invite you to stay fully present. No chat interruptions during the first part of the sessions. There will be time later to reflect, ask questions, and enter the conversation together. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Rudy. And I'm so pleased to see some of our podcast guests, Alessa, Ida, and Dana, who already published on our podcast, and to meet Fredrik. And also welcome to Isabelle, who we've been working closely with and who's a good friend, and of course the community who has joined. Really nice to see you all again. This session is actually really personal to me. My education took me to an MBA in SEAD, which was very heavy on finance, and where I learned all about capitalism. I was deeply programmed into the capitalist frame, and also shareholder primacy, like prioritizing the shareholder above everything else, above the planet, above humanity even. As long as the shareholders got a return, everything was okay. And so for me, it's been a journey of unlearning a lot of that, especially after a long career in corporates and startups. My journey has taken me to unlearning all these programs and systems that have been so, ingrained in me. And so tonight is very interesting for me, because for me, it's the move of how do you move finance from extraction into regeneration? What does that look like? What does it mean? And how do we make that shift? So I'm very interested in this conversation. I have some questions myself, and we have some incredible panelists that have different perspectives on this. And here's how we'll move. First, the panelists will give a short presentation, about 7 minutes each. And well, I believe first Rudy's going to make a grounding, then we'll have the presentations, and then we will open it up to questions from all of you. So really looking forward to this, and thank you, everyone. Rudy?
Actually, I didn't schedule a grounding, but
Okay.
I would just, I'll do it quickly. Yeah. Let's just make sure, get in the body, close your eyes for a moment, take some deep breaths through the nose in, out through the mouth, and make sure that you sit straight on your chair. Feel your bum into the chair, your feet on the ground, and just release all your thoughts from today. Just let them flow, and focus on this present moment here with these beautiful people, amazing projects, and great energy. And focus for a moment on the space of your heart and how you can connect that energy to the others here in the room. Take a deep breath in and another one. So that's it. Come back to the space, and I think we'll start with Ida. Welcome, Ida.
Thank you, Rudy. It's really, really nice to be here, and thank you for the short, unprepared grounding. It was beautiful. Alex and Rudy, and now Isabelle as well. I really want to give a huge shout out, and I would say in deep gratitude and respect for the work that you are doing of this in the WhatsApp group, in growing this community, and because it takes a lot of work. So I also really want to honor that. I can say this with quite confidence because I've been doing that work for, well, around 9 years with my work. So obviously, well, my name is Ida. I am here in the darker corner, not darker corner, but like in the dark in Norway, Oslo. The sun is setting quite early in the Scandinavian countries right now. I would say over these 9 years, I've been working with this community in Catapult and driving Catapult Future Fest and building that as a platform for change makers of all sorts. Several of you that is on this round table here has also been there in person and know what the gathering is. But there's been a focus on impact investing for sustainability, environments, investing in technology for good, and that part, and also using technology for solving challenges in the world. And I think it was the second year I brought in quite a level of consciousness and awareness, and named the whole 2019 gathering, The Future is You, to put you in the center of these investment in these solutions of these things and collaborations that we're doing and building. And it was a lovely journey. And I'm going to be a little bit personal here because an amazing journey, a lot of learning, a lot of people and connection. I would say that the human effect, the human factor is what I might be most proud of. I know about 4 marriages and 3 children that has been coming out of people meeting at Catapult's Future Fest. And but the year of 2024, I hadn't worked with the gathering for a couple of years, and I came back in 2023. Obviously, there was the pandemic. And something was unaligned with me. And when I'm trying to figure out what that is or what that was, it was actually when we started out in 2017 to moving fast forward to 2024, the sense of community, the sense of collaboration, the sense of doing and being there just for the fun or just for contributing to some common, I would say, movement building, I felt very strongly was in decline. There was, even in the impact space, there were more extraction, there were more networking, there were more relationship, not as a mutual thing, but as like, what can I gain? And maybe it was my time. I'd done my job. I built the community, and I've been part in doing and creating something really wonderful. But whether or not it was that, or if I just felt I needed to do something else, or there was a clear unalignment of what I saw of, or missed maybe, of value and values, and the sense of like collective orientation and co-agency, it really, it made me sad. It almost broke my heart a little bit. So what do you do then? I quit. And as Alex said, I went on a huge journey of unlearning, relearning, and now regrouping back into in what way can I contribute and apply myself in a different way. I look very much into creativity. I look very much into creativity as an act of resilience. I look into resilience. I look into what that means to be and become resilient, not only because of oneself, our own practice, but as a community. And I think that it has a lot to do with leadership and leadership practices. That's why I also wrote the other day, I'm not sure how and what way finance or investment will change if we not also revisit how and what we think about leadership and leadership practices. And I think I'm going to just stop there and leave it to whoever wants to grab the mic here. And we have a lot of time, so yeah, any question or from anyone, I'm happy to answer, if that's okay. Rudy, Alex?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great statement that if leadership doesn't change, finance will not change. So it's a good intro. Who would like to pick in on that one? Dana?
Yes, absolutely. I can go next. However, I have to say, I really need to get back into that mode of being in an online meeting. I'm right now in Brazil, in Belém. I have been in Brazil now the last 6 weeks. This is my first online meeting in 6 weeks. It's a totally different way of being. It's been such an amazing journey to be here, to be with the Amazon River, be with the Amazon forest, and being here just visiting so many amazing systems thinkers, first in Sao Paulo at the conference of Horazes, and then from that urban jungle go into the natural jungle and really be in the Amazon, being in the middle also of extraction in Rondônia, visiting 2 indigenous communities, and from there hopping into COP30, into being in a lot of side events the last weeks. So I'm still kind of like gathering my thoughts, trying to let it sink in, everything that I have lived and experienced and felt here. And going back into this mode of explaining everything online, that is moving, and talking about leadership and talking like what's moving in my heart, and to build on what Ida was saying. Yes, I think if leadership is not changing, to sinking down from that head level, like where I am now, it's the blue zone of COP30, where things are very head-spaced, down actually into the body, and feeling from the heart, and talking and connecting from the heart. I think really things will change. And I don't know if you can hear that. For me, it's quite loud right now in the background because actually it's pouring. It's just started raining because we're here in the rainy season, and maybe that leads me to the next thought, to our topic of finance. The more I connect here with the indigenous communities, and we talk a lot about all of the sacredness of water and all of the importance of water, and also all the challenges they have around the toxification of water due to all of the legal and illegal mining and all of the other activities that are happening actually in their lands. I feel that really finance has to become back to being a sacred stream, like a water that really waters everything and everyone, regardless of who it is and where it is. Meaning to say, it has to flow freely and have that sacredness again that maybe it never had. I don't know, but I know that if you're using finance as a tool, as if you're using water basically to feed the world, to feed whoever needs it in the amount that is needed, and definitely with a clear intention. I think that's very important to have this, again, the connection to the heart with a clear intention, with reciprocity to make it free flow, to not be like a stagnant artificial lake, but being like a river that is really feeding everyone. I think that's a way that we need to start thinking. Yeah. So that has been also like a free flow kind of consciousness sharing. And otherwise, what do I do? Very much for to connect as many people from the finance world, vision of the original people, the way they see and they feel and sense the world, the way they relate to it, especially. So, I'm connected here to so many brilliant Indigenous speakers, leaders, and healers. So, my work will be to just connect as many people as I know in the field of finance, actually to have this kind of experience, to sit with them in their territories and really listen to the land, listen to the waters, and obviously then, also let more of this kind of intentional finance flow, especially to projects of, cleaning the water, keeping it clean, protecting. Think now with new projects that we are onboarding here, so to say, we have about 850,000 hectares of land that we suddenly have the pleasure to assist and to help, by simply bringing in the sacred waters, so to say, and to bring in our hearts and our time as partners. So many indigenous communities that we have met in. And that's only the one in Brazil. Yeah, so maybe I'll just leave it to that. And if you have any questions, about what's happening here at COP, because I know a lot of people have chosen not to come here. Even more people did not have the opportunity to come here. Who probably have much more to say than me. So I'm very happy to just share sentiments from here, what I've lived, what I sense, because I do feel that this is quite an important meeting, especially also for the Indigenous community, but also for the community of the Kinabot, community of the Ribari, and also for our part of the world who has come here to actually, meet in.
Thank you, Dana, and we'll get back to you on the COP thing for sure. Who could go next?
Well, let me jump in here. Yeah, I was going to suggest Alessa, and just to let everyone know that Alessa has a series on Gaia, 7 episodes so far, I think, called The Road to Utopia. And one of them is on the circular economy, which speaks to me personally because I am from Finland, and Finland is moving towards a circular economy. So welcome, Alessa.
Thank you, Alex. And I forgot that among your nationalities, there is Finland. Of course, I remember Brazil. And I'm like, if all countries had Finland's leadership, it's quite up my street, I have to say, what I see from your country. Hi, everybody. It's so cozy to be here. I'm in Lisbon, by the way, Rudy. It's actually my base. So Web Summit was in my home turf. It was an exciting week. I guess that what I feel like sharing, just to open it, is some reflections about finance, stepping back on how finance works and bridging it to listening. Because, my background is at the intersection of innovation, technology, entrepreneurship, building companies, and investing. And on the investment side, I've been in very different parts of the capital stack and allocation, like from private equity to very early stage venture capital. And something that I have myself kind of realized more concretely in recent times, in the last 12, 18 months, but I took perspective on that and I thought, okay, this is a very, very good reminder, because perhaps I knew it and I feel it naturally, like subconsciously, understanding how the space works. The big contrast is that in technology and innovation, when we build ventures, when we think about the impact and new areas of, you mentioned, Alex, the TV series on Gaia, we have an episode on the circular economy, we have regenerative communities, we have nuclear fusion, alternative education with the Green School in Bali. So this is all about thinking, how could the world look like and it doesn't today, and how can we like push that envelope, and how can we make crazy new things happen? Finance is the opposite of that. And we can argue with that however much we want. I used to very much have that attitude on the innovation side of things. And yet in the past years, across different activities that we do at Top Tier Impact, listening has been much more interesting. And I'm saying this because ultimately, to be able to listen and understand why finance works so differently, and what do I mean by that anyway? I mean that in finance, innovation isn't a thing. Innovation is like, wait, more risk, more complexity, less understanding, not good. Does that mean that it's not possible to do things differently? Of course it doesn't, but it requires understanding. And this understanding and listening, I think, is actually so essential to where we are at today, because one way or the other, we are all, and I am, and we are very good judging right and wrong, right? And the ones who are not making it happen versus those who are making it happen today. And I find it more interesting to ask myself, well, why is that the case? And what is actually going on? And how can a deeper, more compassionate understanding that I have, on a human level, combined with the sector and how the sector works, yield something new, yield something different, push that envelope without that being forceful, without that being disregarding of what's going on, for better or for worse, right, in the industry. So I think that this is very important to keep in mind. Finance works with risk return, and I did a lot around nature investments and nature finance in the past 24 months, 18 to 24 months. At Top Tier Impact, we gathered a lot around this topic. We had our Nature Investment Summit last year. We covered nature investments at all our major gatherings. And frankly, what I did, guys, is a lot of listening. And my listening is quite, or can be quite ferocious. I have a lot of questions. I'm very curious. I want to understand deeper and deeper what's actually going on, but I'm listening and I love it. And so in nature, I did a lot of listening, which is not necessarily, yeah, but it should be in this other way. So what are you guys doing about it? It's more like, oh, it's in this way. Okay, tell me more. And how do you feel about it? And what's going on? And what's the structure behind it? And just all of that, especially when we think about complex hyperobjects. Part of my academic background being in governance design and system design, a complex hyperobject, like it's not like there's this one person who has decided to make things in one way. And that is the one single point of failure. It's very rarely like that. For example, right now at Top Tier Impact, we're doing a project on water-based innovation, water efficiency, water resilience with SAP, which is a multinational software company. And that's a whole nation of its own. And it's not like, oh, well, there's this person or that person. No, there's like, let's be humble. Like, let's listen to all the different people and start building a picture. And the picture is in and of itself something on its own, right? Like the company is a living and breathing organism. Ironically, I always thought about Top Tier Impact as a living and breathing organism, because the community, which when I started it 5-6 years ago, I didn't think it was going to be my next business. I just couldn't unsee impact and sustainability as a space. Like I had to contribute to try and do what I could to lift the space up, to lift this paradigm up. But I always thought of it as its own thing, it is its own thing. And so to just approach all these subjects and all these areas, with our unique and valuable perspectives and our skills, but also with the humbleness of like, what is actually going on? Because I think the last thing we need in general out there is more arguing of like, well, I know, and you're bad and we're good and all of that. And actually most of the issues that we really want to solve in impact, they often have levels of complexity that, it can be exciting, But again, I think it calls for the humbleness of defending a point of view, but not necessarily thinking that you've got it. I'll give you an example, deep sea mining. I see a lot of activism around it. And usually when I approach something that I don't know, again, I just go into learning mode and listening. And I have spoken with, people who know a million things more than I do, and coming from different angles, like someone who's like in that field, coming from 1.5 decades of like hardcore activism in human trafficking across the global south, specifically Africa mostly, and going into that field because of seeing an opening. I'm like, I'm interested in hearing this person, just like I'm interested in hearing like another colleague and so on, building an opinion, right? Because just to speak to this example specifically, land-based mining is not getting much better anytime soon. And even when it gets a bit better and respects guidelines, it's still massive habitat destruction. So what's going on down the sea, right? So like for me to approach that, to just learn, and I kept learning for several months and building a picture that when I speak with people who decided that, oh, it's just a bad idea and we need to ban it and that's it, they don't know all those things. And it's not their fault. They have such beautiful energy, right? That they want to put in the service of something good that is amazing and that is always to admire. And yet it's complex. And so to step back, right, and try to untangle a lot of these issues that we see in impact. It's inevitable also to get a bit polarized. On my newsletter a few years ago, I talked about climate adaptation needing to get more attention than just climate mitigation. But at the time, everybody thought mitigation was more than enough. And I got so many angry people that are going like, no, we can't talk about adaptation like that. We should be focusing on mitigation. But guess what? When you stopped and researched where we were at, this was probably like 3.5 years ago or so, you could see that actually allocating more towards adaptation was important. So I guess that what I'm bringing, it just very spontaneously came up today, thinking about finance and thinking about listening, is, these perspective of trying to keep and learning more and more with each other and making ourselves less good at the quick judgment of what's good or bad, which, I practice every day as much as I can. But I'm also fascinated by everything that I've learned, whether it's projects like this water innovation project that I just mentioned, and many other things that are on this nature investment journey as well, that have taught me so many incredible things. And so, I guess that what I am bringing up and calling in terms of regenerative finance is more bridging different perspectives and bridging gaps.
Thank you, Alessa. Fredrik, how does everything sound in your world from your perspective?
So, maybe, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, so let's take a little bit of the starting point. So when I co-founded Fund Forward, which is our investment company in Stockholm, Sweden, work in Nordics, with my co-founders, Anja, and Sarah, we actually wanted to work with several layers. We wanted to be inclusive, to have another representation of entrepreneurs than normally gets the money. We wanted to be effect first. And we wanted to be designable and adaptive around how financing would be done. So we wanted to be creative in that part as well. So, and that's very difficult for society to understand, that you want to do several things at a time. So if you ask me today, I want to be all about regenerative financing. But the reality out there is not always like that. So what do we do then? I'm going to give you a few examples. So I think for us, it's not are we regenerative or not. We're trying to be the kind of pragmatic alternative that lures both entrepreneurs and investors into more regenerative principles and regenerative systems. So, and I think why we started Fund Forward was just some 3 years ago or so. We met was because we couldn't find an answer of who is actually investing effect first. So when we started, our principle was quite simple. I wanted to start with what kind of maximum positive effect can be created in this context where the investee is. And how can we start with that? And organize everything around that effect. So we want the business model to generate around that effect, and why not also add the financing and the investing to kind of circulate around the effect, which meaning that the more money the company earns, the more effect there should be. And the more we invest into something, the more effect it should create, and it should also regenerate capital back to that. So for us, it was that starting point and adding those kind of levers into investing. And when we get into this, we scared a few entrepreneurs by bringing in too much complexity at a time, but intentionally we've been very experimental on this. So what we do actually, today we have 6 or almost 7 companies in our portfolio, and we use a little bit here and a little bit there of the ingredients to move it in the right direction. So what I wanted to say with that is that we think that we can, in that sense, today, 2025, represent adaptive capital that can be designed into what fits best for that scaling. So we can be very, very demanding on what kind of regeneration we want to have seen. But there is also an understanding of some kind of theory of change perspective. So we need to understand a little bit what can we do now, what can we do next, and what can we do at the third level. So that's why we created, I would say, some kind of brain crash for some entrepreneurs, because we wanted to bring in everything at a time. And but if we take a step back, I think if we should have some kind of regenerative finance systems, they got to have some kind of principles. So I think it gets back to how you design the principle. And we can not only talk about, of course, about investing and financing as such. So it means we also need to look at how the governance is. Is it a company organization that is created for regeneration or for extraction, or have they not decided yet? So also on a personal level, I have also spent quite a few years on looking into different formats and forms, shapes and forms for organizing in a more purpose-oriented way, like steward ownership, for example, and all other types of collective approaches. So to bring on a little bit more complexity on that, we also brought that to the table when meeting entrepreneurs that never had heard about stuff like that. But they had a great purpose, they had a great mission, and they wanted to be in something new. But when you bring on all that I've mentioned so far, it becomes quite difficult for the entrepreneur to handle that in a society where all the rest is doing the same. So I think what we are doing right now is actually experimenting with this, as I said. So every time we look at a new opportunity, we try to go open mind, see how can we design this the most regenerative way we can for this context. And what can be learned from that? What kind of lessons can we also bring back to the others and say, hey, this worked at this context. Is that something you can use at another place? So we are very much, just to maybe summarize that a little bit, into this kind of, when we looked at investment conditions as such, to go in open mind, design to what fits best. And also we have tended to focus almost 100% to circular economy as of right now. So that means that we're trying to create circular money, circular capital. So I think getting back to if our investments should always be agenda driven, and we see it as purpose money. So if purpose money goes into one venture, okay, what is actually the purpose, and how much, if that generates revenues and also returns, can we decide on a principle that goes back invested into the same purpose? And I think this, just to have some kind of lever on purpose money, if you use 100% to put back into the same purpose, or you use 80% or 50 or 20, that's the first decision for entrepreneurs and investors to decide on. 100% is excellent, but I mean, as long as you work with this thinking of what kind of principle you actually should have, it's a starting point. So for example, we are active in companies in food system, also in reuse and designing of reuse cycles in textiles, and also for water circulation systems, where we actually invest in companies that create circulation of important elements like phosphorus, for example. So we can create a circulation that didn't exist before. So that's and then we're also into looking at nature's system. Maybe I can leave it like that, but by saying that what we would like to invest is in regenerative design from the start. and see just how we can adapt capital and get other investors to invest along how that ecosystem would work. So it's always a question of what is the best, if we should imitate nature in this sense. You cannot also predict how the ecosystem will pan out. It's impossible. So you need to have principles that can be dynamic in some kind of ecosystem building, which you cannot control from the start. So that leads you back to what do you actually want with your project? What kind of objectives are the most important? And what kind of principles can you design in to have everyone in this ecosystem to be incentivized by the same thing? That is kind of the objective, even though if they're entrepreneurs or partners or customers or suppliers or investors. So I think the task that we're on is to get everyone flowing in the same regenerative spirals. But that's, of course, in this context, easier said than done, but step by step.
Thank you, Fredrik, and thank you, everyone. If I would distill each of you to a sentence, and you said much more than this, I would say, Ida, what I heard from you is that finance cannot regenerate unless leadership regenerates first. The culture of leadership regenerates. And Dana, I heard that finance should flow a sacred stream that sustains life, and that we should also learn from Indigenous wisdom, especially since you're at COP right now. And Alessa, what I heard from you is regeneration requires deep listening inside existing financial realities, and we shouldn't bypass them. I also heard complex hyperobjects, which I'm very interested in myself. And Fredrik, what I heard from you is that we should design capital adaptively so it meets companies where they are and help them evolve towards regeneration. My question would be, maybe to start off with, is if we redesign capital as a living system, what changes first? Do we need to change the metrics, the ownership structures, the time horizons, the investor psychology? How do we go about this change? And feel free to jump in.
Okay. Yeah, but I can just add to, so I don't know how familiar you are with steward ownership as a concept. It's maybe a lot, maybe some, it's a little bit what Patagonia did the other year, which got
well, thank you,
known.
Fredrik. I mean, this is something that Rudy and I have been speaking also with Isabelle and a few others for Voices of Emergence itself. As you know, it's very early days for us. It started as a podcast. Now there's a community. But eventually we're thinking about, well, what kind of organism does this itself look like? And we've looked at steward ownership, some kind of guild or stewardship. So yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not saying that that is the solution, but it can be inspired by that, by dividing a little bit power and votes from capital and the capital functions. So I think in one sense, what I meant with that is that capital is, if you look back to kind of old investments, it means power. So the more capital you bring in, the more power and the more mandate you have in whatever venture is going on. But what steward ownership does is to divide votes and capital. So you can actually put capital into something and you can get returns from it, but you cannot kind of change the journey of the company into something else. So you kind of split that up to be an independent principle. And I think that's just what I wanted to add to the designing thing, that when you invest into something, you don't have to be the voice of power. I think the capital in this sense should be more of the oil in the machine or the water in the nature or something that actually flows and smoothens the system and regenerates, but the values are others than that. But that means that it also has to circulate. So it has to be designed in a way that it works like, and it's kept in the system and also regenerative in its design itself. But I think it's a distinction between talking about capital as a power thing or as an oil in the machine, if I may use that metaphor.
So I would jump in and say that from my perspective, what would need to be redesigned is actually very, very fundamental. And it's the accounting system. It's like the way that actually this whole platform works, because we haven't priced the value of nature and natural resources and ecosystem services into the current economic paradigm. And that is at the root of negative externalities, such as pollution, such as resource overuse. This is core. And so, if we're really talking about redesign, there's a lot of nice things that we can do. But at the end of the day, I think that this is really, it's not even just at the base, because this is not just a market failure, as some call it. I sometimes simplify to a big market failure that nature is not accounted for. So we have all these externalities to deal with. And, we're kind of swimming against the tide, right? With other fixes, really. But it's almost like it's coded in the principles, when you look at where the roots of the current model, the economic model that we operate within come from. You see a few centuries ago, some of the thinkers who put it out there. And among these thinkers that put a lot of these philosophies out there that we used to shape the system, nature was often referred as she and infinitely abundant. There was like in some of these places, like unfortunately, like the she was not good news, because some of these thinkers were known to dislike women, right? And when you say infinitely abundant from this economic thinking, it means that it's valued at zero, right? So there are always like deeper roots to explore, but I think that at the roots of what created like the values that built the current system, there are assumptions that have kept leading us to where we are at today. And so quite frankly, guys, like the way that I look at an area such as regenerative investments understood under the nature umbrella, I look at it as areas that are investable within the current paradigm, such as regenerative farmland, monoculture, however, for funds in that space with okay returns. And then areas that need fundamental economic redesign, like full-scale ecosystem restoration. And they need an economic redesign that should be underpinned by global policies that could have been coordinated in places like where Dana is at right now at COP, to give us things like a global mandatory carbon tax, right? Those are the kind of parameters that you can play with to have that kind of intervention. But it is very complex and it does require a lot of coordination, and it hasn't happened. And so, operating within this paradigm, I stay realistic also on where can things be moved, how much now, so areas that are investable so that we can move those things. And then on the things that require these higher fundamental redesign, we do a lot of thought leadership and advocacy, and we gather people together and we seed these ideas, right? And we debate them and we say, why not? Like, what's against that, right? So I see it almost as tackled in different ways.
Isabelle, yes?
Yes, thank you. To me, finance is really a mirror of the current society. We are actually a growth society. And that's what we do with money. Money calls for money. But it wasn't always the case. Some other societies were much more on honor or ties, and we used money to break these ties. So we arrive at the end of this time where money served the purpose of growth, because growth is not working anymore. And as you said, Alessa, it's a very masculine energy. And when you deplete everything, then there's a lack. And to me, the solution comes also from this risk of collapse, because basically what you see today, the actors that are currently moving are those who are working in insurance or in actuarial, like predicting the future, where they are predicting actually that there will be a lot of losses. And this is the interesting thing, because when we wanted to start investing in good or green or sustainability, we started with green energy, renewables, but this was still green growth. So we were not changing the paradigm. Then we went to impact investing, so new business models. But the thing is, we are trapped into this return paradigm that is linked to two things in my mind: the mandates from what we call the LPs, the institutional investors or the main investors, And the compensation system, especially in banking industry, VCPE, there's a huge amount of money to make here. What we are seeing now is that breaking this, as you said, Alessa, we start to go more to soil, infirmary, and ocean. And you see some funds going into this and saying 50% of my carry is now linked to my impact KPIs. But we are still in the same frame. Now we have people who work in the farming industry and they come together and they do club deals, or they do like bioregions, and they put money together to try to fund what actually matters to them. That is to say, not fake nature tech that is having some drones that would, drop seeds in the middle of the Amazon, claiming that is reforesting. And if you go to this, then you arrive to this point where on one hand, you have all the insurances that are very afraid of what's coming. Like there will be like a coastal housing crisis that is coming, and they don't want to bear these losses. And at the other side, you have all these people that are trying to do systemic investing, where you take all the chain and you want to mutualize to rebuild something that makes sense, that is not siloed. And then you arrive to these things that we currently have. And Julia was in the call, but she left, which is more like to blended finance. So we have this thing where currently the French National Bank is doing stress tests with the Biodiversity National Office. And they bring banks and VCs and PEs and consultants all together in the room, trying to redefine a common roadmap. Of course, these banks and VCs still have the say LPs, but the LPs are in the room, and they are also trying to change so that today you have banks that are adjusting the credit rate of the credits for farmers to regenerative indexes, not because it's good, but because if the soil is not rich and not lively, then the water is not going into the soil when we have extreme raining, and then it's flood. So basically, because we are now in an extreme situation, we cannot claim to do good while doing it cosmetically, but we need to actually do it to avoid collapse, because the collapse is super expensive. Because I think it was Alessa telling it, it's all about the cost of the risk. Like basically when you're in a bank, you measure and the cost of risk, risk point. And so that goes also with all these natural accounting systems, care, lift, etc. But care, lift are yet very difficult to implement, and I've tried, so I can tell, because it puts so much debt that basically the listed companies would just collapse in their market value. So they don't want to go there now. But I think all the insurance and the reinsurers, they are very discreetly starting to push and lobby on this. So stop the return, break the return model, work on LPs, work on compensation, because compensation is linked to grid and how we flow the money. Yeah, that's how it flows back. That's how my little take on it.
Who wants to add on that?
I don't know, for me, it's not maybe an add-on. It's more on actually staying on something which I find very essential, even though, of course, it might come across as a bit philosophical, but I do believe like really this deep change of financial system needs to come along with a big questioning of who we are as humanity. It's about our role. Like once our role becomes redefined as the guardians of this planet, our intentions when whatever project we do, whatever financial instrument that we then design changes. Right? If our intention is to guard everything that sustains us, and that's our job, then this fundamentally changes everything. And then, yes, once we have this kind of mindset and mind frame, I think then we can talk all of the technicalities and financial instruments, etc., etc. So for me, this comes first.
I can just add on that. I think so. if you look, as you say, if you look at regenerative fields like farming, for example, or where you can actually improve soil quality by doing the right things, that's an obvious gain. And I think what I meant earlier with design and purpose-driven investment is if you look at so we collaborate, for example, with a Swedish credit debt company, so we can do blended when see fit. But I think if you look at, for example, there's a case of this white oak in Georgia in the US, where they went from 3 employees to 180 because they kind of moved everything back and improved the amount of soil organic matter from somewhere from 0.5% to 5%, so tenfold improved the soil quality. So what kind of investments did they need for that? They needed what actually they need to do exactly what they did. So I think it's more getting back to, okay, how can this be regenerative? And only then, what is needed to create that regenerative system? So while the world is doing what it does, I believe in creating examples where this can be shown in small micro scale or larger scale. So we can use those examples together to inspire other how it could be. So we will actually also from my point of view, together with partners in Europe mainly, we will do a kind of best practice research the coming year actually of the best, what should I say, designed investments that fits with the regeneration and really positive effects. So in order to gather them up in a kind of library and see what was actually good, what was just part of old, etc. So that's something that I would love to share with you in a year from now. And you just hit me with all the examples you have, and we will go through them with some brilliant people that we have got in touch with. That's just a short comment on that.
That sounds lovely, Fredrik. We're definitely going to take that on. Perhaps anyone in the audience has a question? We can open the floor. Please add your question perhaps in the chat room. Or if anyone has one, you can also ask it here.
You can just comment or build somewhere between Rick and Dana here as well. I've been listening to Alessa's inspiration here. It is truly about listening, and I realized a lot of I want to second that, like, if we are guardians or we are stewards of this world, of this planet, of humanity, or it is about understanding that we are part of the system. It's not something cognitive or it's not something technical. Yeah, the capitalist system are built on certain philosophies, mindsets, epochs, historical movements, innovations, and so forth throughout the history of humankind, right? But I would say that it is very much about these personal choices that we take and daring to take them and testing them and having the imagination and having the, I would say, philosophies or designs that capture that complexity and are able to move with it in, if it's circular or regenerative ways, like fun forward. But the challenge, I think, is that we don't really, well, that it may be something that I could put to everyone on the call. I think part of the challenge here is the lack of knowledge, the lack of language around it. And then we speak in, I would say, technical financial terms. But in what way do we actually have languages or knowledge practices for whatever imagined alternative capitalist model that we want to move towards? And I think a lot stops there. And I also want to just put out there, yeah, we're speaking about more private capital here, and someone will mention pension funds and so forth. And there is grants and there's institutional capital and there's a lot of other pockets of money and on an EU level policies and governance and mandates to distribute some of these money towards what kind of frameworks or what kind of Europe in this case do we see. And I just learned today that on the EU Capital Horizon and so on that was like allocated just recently last week, there were 80% more applications than previous year. And a lot of that actually has to do also with people using AI for writing these grants. But the money that was distributed, or the grants that were given, were almost all of them to the larger institutions that actually have the time and money and human resources to spend on writing these grants. So it's like there is very little risk taking within these, let's say, free money in that sense, that are not connected to the classical return of the investment or the risk, or that could actually be part of facilitating or catalyzing some of these heavy lifting changes that we would maybe like to see, because they are quite stuck in their own institutional systems and universes that they have the mandates to control, right? So yeah, those are just a couple of things. It's the systemic level, it's the macro level, but it also really has to do with a personal level and whether or not we have a language to actually be able to speak about the futures that we would like to see, even within the finance and capital realms, to call them like that.
Thank you, Ida, for bringing that up. And there were some questions also addressed to you, which we'll ask after. But Yves has a question also. Please go ahead.
It's a mix of questions on remark following the last discussion. I think when a few years ago, when we started to measure and monitor and manage impact unit along the value chain, it was very difficult because, as it was mentioned, it's very complex. I think there is a current revolution, and I think just been mentioned. It's what the agent AI and agentic is moving, and we are at this inflection point. And I think it's a time to give back to the human this technology as a digital common, as stewardship token, because it's a very important now. Because with this new solution, now you can create an agent that is bringing the positive tipping point in symbiosis to better understand the ecosystem and the systemic of the process. And then we can change the communication with culture, local language, local feedback from the global south. So there is a lot of interest to better alignment. And when we move to a flow of regenerative flow as a polycapital, then you can bring the financing, because they can move in an ecosystem of different projects, but they will better understand the context and the local people. And what the agentic AI and agent AI do, they allow the communication in a very simple way, but it should be back to the human as a true infrastructure, not to be extracted by the current ecosystem.
So can I add just on micro level? I mean, interesting thing is wisdom of the crowd, but maybe leave that for later. But if you ask the individual, and not in social media, I mean directly, if they get the opportunity to invest in a really regenerative, really good project, they want to do that. The individual wants to do that no matter what return there is. If they just get maybe the money back, or get to see the result. And we have tried that. So we did investments more like gathering a group of really high competent people for that area. So they were able to invest really small tickets to be part of the investment. And they did that with just expecting a few percent like an interest rate if it went well. So it was total risk investment anyway. So what happened is that that went well, and they got the opportunity to get these a few percents back. They didn't want that. Put it back in. We want the money back to do more of that purpose. So just throwing in a small fraction of hope into this, that actually exists. We should remember that. Now we're not talking about pension funds. That's another game. But there is a strength in that. And we can, of course, see that in micro loans cross border as well, that it's happening quite a lot.
You know, Alessa, you brought up hyperobjects, and I think you were referring to Hyperobject in reference to your own initiatives, top tier impact, and how that itself is an organism. But it brought up for me the whole entire financial system itself as a hyperobject. This is a complex hyperobject that we're all in relationship with. And one of the things that came to me many years ago is that, wow, I'm participating in the economy economy literally means management of resources. And it especially makes me think about scarcity. I have to manage scarce resources, and therefore I am in competition with everybody else. And I better secure my own scarce resources before anyone else does. So the very way I was brought up, culturally, educationally, was in this relationship to finance, about managing scarce resources. And I was wondering, how different would life be if we were all brought up into a feeling of abundance, in relationship with abundance, rather than in relationship with economy? So this may not be what you were referring to as a hyper object, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so with hyper objects, we can mean a lot of different things, right? Climate change is a hyper object. And I think it's good to be aware of that and like grasp this terminology, just because it lets you step back and be like, are we doing ourselves a favor or not? Calling it like that and making it so abstract, because by definition, a hyper object. Now, if it's a company, because I was also talking about large multinationals like this water project with SAP, it's tough to grasp. Like, it's not just like one simple organization, right? And so, but in the case of climate specifically, I want to bring it up and close the circle there, because in my experience, making things more tangible, and now Fredrik was just talking about how when you put something out to the people and they can be involved in a tangibly regenerative project, that's exciting. I want to stay in there. I want to be part of it. I want to keep on putting money into that. It's relatable as well. The abstract level of climate change in general, does it do us a service if we want urgency? Not necessarily, right? Like, I think the overused analogy of, well, COVID had, a massive global response in like weeks, months, whereas climate, which technically is an emergency, doesn't. So, breaking things down into their simplicity, when we become aware that this is what's going on and we can ask ourselves, does that make sense, is important, super important. And then I think that there can also be, earlier when I was speaking about it, since I was thinking about, a global multinational that operates, in my opinion, in areas that they have so much impact, because, in a case like that, it's ERP software. It's like the lifeblood of a company. It's like it sits in so many like core processes. And, from that perspective, I just find, okay, let's appreciate the complexity so that we don't get polarized in saying that, that approach or climate in itself, or like this company is X, Y, or Z, right? It's actually like there's so much more going on. And then to your point about our economy and the idea of managing resources and scarce resources, well, this current economic paradigm is built on scarcity. That is the first thing that in economics you learn. There is scarcity of resources, so you need to trade with efficiency. So from my perspective, look, if we step back and we look at the root cause of it all, if we can all, in our day-to-day, in our personal paths, in how then we show up in other parts of our life, inspire a shift, because all of this stuff was created by humans for humans, right? It's just us and our ancestors that came up with whatever they knew best at the time. And frankly, they did a lot, right? Because we came up with all these fancy stuff out of nowhere, And so let's just appreciate the fact that to design for the complexity of human life, like that's been nature's job for millions, billions of years, 3.8 billion years or so, right? So our systems, our economic system, are just a very basic, abstract, and malfunctioning representation of the complexity of life. And so, to say, well, what does it take to change things at the root? Well, the root cause, it's of course consciousness shifts, right? Because what you're talking about, that's a big feat. Because what does it mean to live and bring people up and families up from abundance. Like that means facing our fears every day in the small ways and in the big ways, right? And facing them not just for ourselves, but for everybody who came before us. And that is ultimately more at a root cause level. And for me personally, you know, if there are the spaces and the times to share that, I do, just because I think it's so impactful, but I'm also not gonna force it anywhere, right? Going back to the listening, you know, from my perspective, that kind of change of the mindset, of how we relate, what Dana mentioned before as well, like that is really deep change that we can just ourselves, you know, in the privacy of our own heart, like decide like if and how much we do it. And that's that. And then beyond that, there is a question of the design and what comes with it. But of course, we're not going to be able to redesign a system that we created from our own consciousness of where we are at in how we perceive the world, because it's fair enough. You know, if you look at how nature works and animals, I mean, nature is brutal. Nature is not just like butterflies and happy days running down the rivers. Like nature is brutal, and there is something so beautiful and humbling, you know, about its power. Like let's just remember like how tiny we are, you know, in that picture. So we've actually, you know, back to managing scarce resources and optimizing how we manage our resources, we've actually just been trying to get by, like within the magnitude of the planet we operate within. I just think it's a good thing to kind of like remind ourselves where we're coming from, like, and how we didn't know any better. And yes, this is a massive question of our times. That's why I find so exciting to work around it and to try and solve things within it. But I think that what you're talking about, Alex, is a much deeper process that's hopefully unfolding, even though we don't see it a lot sometimes.
Absolutely, Alessa. And, you know, it's talking about resources. It's stunning when you consider that the indigenous population, I think, is about 5% of humanity is indigenous. And they are stewarding, I think, like 80% of nature. So the indigenous, the small population, is taking care of Mother Nature, and they're not doing it by spreadsheets. So in other words, they have some other type of metrics, some other type of relationship with nature, which does not rely on numbers or impact or, you know, any of these things. It's a relationship, mutuality. I know Dana is in the middle of the Amazon, in the middle of it. But yeah, that's what comes up for me. And does anyone else have questions from our audience?
Yeah, I wanted to liaise on that, and then liaise also back to Ida's questions. That because Alessa, you pointed out that you're listening to the ecosystem, but what we are not listening to is Mother Earth. I think real regeneration is learning to listen to what Mother Earth is telling us. And we have now been in a couple of decades of very linear progress, thanks to technology also. And we know now that, you know, comes to an end, or to its, you know, it cannot keep on going like that. So, and I think Mother Nature is telling us in a gentle way as of now, and probably is going to increase, of like, the linear is not going to keep on working for you guys. You know, we have to move back to cyclical work, or how do we design for a world that is not linear? Because we only know linear, we only know growth. So, and I would like to, you know, throw this in the group here of like, how do we design for, you know, the unknown? And how do we design, or perhaps we don't need to design, but we need to get comfortable with the unknown and create abundance from this space. So, and then I liaise to the questions to Ida, like what type of leadership, you know, models of leadership is requiring this type of action. I think there were two questions like that towards Ida. Who wants to take it?
And I think Fredrik had his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, go for it, Fredrik.
No, I wanted actually to give the question back to you, Ida, because we talked about regeneration in theory, you and I, before, and I know you have done some reflecting and studies. I mean, what would you expect from regenerative findings, and what would you look for? I mean, it would be interesting to hear if you have any reflections on that. If you could wish, I mean, how could it work?
I'm kind of throwing it back to you again. No,
Okay.
but no. The thing is, like, just the question about leadership, and people have been talking about ecosystem, and I think we're looking at the ability to ecosystem leadership, and there are like a different type of leadership practices. And when I was like thinking about it, I think that what Fund Forward also do by this complexity of this design, and where are the different researchers, and are they layered, and when do they work for the founders, and where do you go into, you know, all sorts of collaboration, although it can be difficult to understand because we don't have a language for it. I think that that will be what I would wish for, because it's kind of ecosystem leadership investing by design. And to answer the question of like what type of leadership do we need besides from that, I think it's from the individual, and looking at leaders, they're not like the leaders today. It's like it's this hierarchical model, and they have like people follow them and they decide. And I think part of it is also being able to diffuse power, to Alessa's point, to actually unlearn, to ask for consultancy, to kind of to listen in, and then also constantly pivot, doing these micro experiments, because things are moving so fast, and daring to do that. And also work with like imagination, the what if, and the shared imaginaries, in the sense of like, but what future can we see? What do we want to create? And I think there's a huge part of, you know, the leaders of tomorrow, they need to be creative and maybe cyclical, in the sense of not being necessarily linear and in the spreadsheet. And obviously, I think I must say that it's about clarity as well. I think there is a lot of leadership that is keeping power by being unclear, and being unclear is quite unkind. So I think it's also in what way do you actually dare, or how can you be vulnerable enough to be brave to say, I don't know, let's test this. Let's have these hard conversations, instead of kind of hide and say like, well, blame the board or something else, which there has been a lot of in leadership practices. And we need to see these type of individuals that are able to lead ecosystems and complexity through creativity and imagination, and build resilience from, I would say, the full potential of all the employees, or whoever one leads. So yeah, if that answered the question.
Thank you, Fredrik.
Yeah, I just want to comment along with that. So we cannot talk about regenerative finance or investing and not talking about governance and organizations as such. So just to state that, I mean, it's obvious. So it doesn't matter. We try to be an investment company, but we do a lot of advising on how to actually design the organization. And also, again, it's not about one organization, one venture, one company. It's always alliance. It's always this ecosystem or network or value chain, if you want to call it that. And it's doesn't matter what you do if you can't weave into that. That is so important. It's even more important that you actually do action together with others. Might be existing stakeholders like big corporations or whatever, or other new, to kind of weave new networks. So, and that has nothing to do with capital. It's about how they orient around purpose. But what I also get back to the design aspect. Once that is set and the principles of that, then capital should come in and fall along that. And also just, I mean, on a general level, I think in the world, we need other representation. We need some kind of structural change, power of collective in new forms and shapes, because we cannot expect, even though political leaders or pension funds, to just go regenerative overnight. It has to be other structures. Sorry to say, but maybe they can get in motion step by step as well. But there have to be new structures built, and I think, if I am optimistic, that there is something in the collective, but there has to be a diversity in representation that is not today.
Well, I'm going to follow straight on that. And kind of on that note of something new to surface, and Rudy, also to your question of what to do, resilience, and we can all understand and build resilience in our own ways. I envisage a world where we live in ways that are reconnected with the land, in non-urban ways that are resilient, that are like fully off grid, self-sufficient. And I see a path very clearly to build that in parallel, because from system theory and governance theory, like often these things, they build up in parallel, right? Alongside the current paradigm. They can happily coexist. And what I'm talking about is actually my next area of building and creating. It's a project that we are putting together right at the intersection of farmland regeneration and fully self-sufficient real estate. And it surfaced in, a similar way to how Top Tier Impact did. I just became obsessed with the question and, finding the answer. Because I think that, guys, in entrepreneurship, we gotta love and be obsessed with what we were building, because otherwise, like, why do it, right? And this TV series that Alex brought up before, I called it Road to Utopia, because I also envisage a world where every human being can be enabled to be on their own unique path to utopia. I want to live in a bottom-up utopia. I have no interest in like a top-down structure. We already know that we're too basic when we try to do things in that way. And so I envisage a world where more and more human beings get enabled and find the courage and find the conditions to go after what we all have, our natural gifts, our natural directions are. And it's just like, listening to that in today's society is not always easy. And so, whatever resilience means to us at the intersection of what we love, then I think that's exciting. For me, the process has been very much, again, this listening that I talked about earlier, but it's a listening outside that then also becomes listening inside, right? Like what resonates, what's exciting, what to explore more. I mentioned before that farmland regeneration has good returns just on a monoculture basis. We work with a lot of funds in that space that are doing great work. They're led by great people, but they're extremely limited, right? Because it is monoculture driven. And if you're tracking something like increasing biodiversity, increasing the quality of the soil, there's only that much you can do very often. At least I'm talking about capital deployment at larger scale, with funds that can go into multiple farms and regions at once. And so, following down that trail and thinking, well, what does it look like to have permaculture, eventually landed at a certain intersection. And I am bringing it up because, in a world where a lot of these vision and talking about, well, what do we want is so limited, right? Because who has the space, right? Like there's so much, but that's our choice. And I do think that things will become more intense overall before whatever shift happens. But that is exactly why I believe that tuning more into what we want to do day to day, if everything stops tomorrow, you would still doing what you're doing today. I think that's key. So that is my 5 cents on, Rudy, your point about what to do and what resilience looks like for all of us to find that and follow what we want to follow.
Thank you,
Alessa. Dana, perhaps a last word from the Amazon?
Last words from the Amazon. Well, actually, my 5 cents right now is actually being more in silence. I mean, I do listen to every one of you, and I find it amazingly fascinating, how eloquently you're, putting this very difficult topic on how to change actually the world of finance into words. And I realized that I'm in a space where I'm just fully in my body, sensing lots of energies, and there is for me so much to integrate at this point that I don't really find words for it. And it's uncomfortable in a way that, yes, I would love to share more with you, but at the same time, I feel that this is the space of unknown where we actually have to be in. And I feel like more following the impulses of the universe right now. Yeah. And rather ask me to be silent and to give that for now or for later on, because I feel it's where we need to sit in to find answers.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you, everyone. We're coming towards the end, and we'll wrap this up quickly. Fredrik, political will is also important, and from the experience of Finland, they a couple of years ago mandated that the entire country should become carbon neutral. Already, the forest, which is 75% of the land, is sustainable, but the rest of the country has to become carbon neutral, which means the cities, the buildings, the transportation systems, the companies themselves have to become carbon neutral themselves. And I think this is important because then you take away these game dynamics of competition and you turn the entire economy into something more sustainable. What I heard today was amazing. It's such a rich conversation. There's so much to talk about on so many levels. I learned that finance is not a fixed system. It's a living system that depends on our own consciousness, our own governance, our design, the choices that we make. So we have to listen, imagine, become better stewards, and have the courage to unlearn these things that we've been programmed into. And so real change begins in how we relate to life. And once we shift, the structure itself shifts. So thank you all for the depth you brought tonight, the depth. This was not just about capital. It's about who we are becoming. And it is our wish that, through these circles, you meet each other and you collaborate with each other and we all find our emergence through this. Like, how do we get through this transition into a better world? Thank you. Rudy? You're on mute, Rudy.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so thank you everyone, Fredrik, Ida, Alessa, and Dana, and also to you, Alex and Isabelle, and everyone joining this with your attention, your presence and care. And know that we also have a community which has a WhatsApp group where you can join. Alex, perhaps you can share the link in the chat, and where we can continue the discussion. We'll be back, I think, in 2 weeks with another subject and another group of people. So meanwhile, I thank you all and have a great day, evening or day.
Thank you all. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Sing no more, naked days are you,